one of the nice things about platform as a service is you get tremendous amount of visibility into what's going on. So this is Google's App Engine, and I can see exactly how much CPU time, how much outgoing bandwidth I've consumed, and so on. Notice it doesn't tell me how many machines I've got. It just tells me how much CPU I used. Imagine if you got your power bill and it said, you've used 2.4 damn generators. Would that be useful? A friend of mine actually made the joke that using infrastructure as a service is kind of like calling up the Hoover Dam and asking them to turn on a generator so you can make some tea. You want to pay per kilowatt, and in this case, you want to pay per CPU, or CPU hour. You also get a lot of debugging tools because these processes are running on a platform that Google runs. So they'll tell you, here's all the requests from every single user, here's how long those requests took to load on a page. Here's your entire bill for every function, how many emails you sent, how many images you manipulated. I don't know one private IT organization that has this level of visibility into their computing. And once the CFO sees this, they're going to refuse to sign bills for anything that doesn't give them this level of visibility. So companies like Google and Force.com, Salesforce's cloud, and so on, are really playing a long game here, because once the company gets a look at this, they're going to say, I'm not buying machines anymore, just give me that. I want computing, not computers.
So that's a report that like Salesforce would provide?
This is from Google's App Engine. And by the way, it's built in for free. So if you're a manufacturer of management tools to IT, and you get this for free with App Engine, are you nervous? I hope so. Because that's like, today I'm going to charge you for a tool to find out how much electricity you bought. No, it comes on your bill, right? It's part of the service. Now, both of these are clouds. They're both elastic. They have some important differences. Platform as a service looks great, but if I use Google and then I decide I don't want to use App Engine anymore and I bring it in-house, remember all those API calls that I made to manipulate images and check people? Those don't exist anymore, so my code doesn't work. At least with infrastructure, I can take my code and bring it back in-house. I can only write in certain languages. App Engine, for example, supports Java and Python. If you want to write something in Rails, you're going to have to figure out how to get Rails to run on top of that. Infrastructure as a service, you can write things in Logo if you want to. With Platform as a Service, scaling is automatic. You have limited options. You can use any tool you want as long as it's one I gave you. Otherwise, you can't use a tool that's not in the system. And so Google will only let you store data in certain ways. App Engine's only good for certain applications because there are certain kinds of applications that when you try to build them, they won't scale. They'll break. So you're building things, but Google's telling you to build it like Google builds it. On the other hand, there's a good argument to be made that building things like Google builds them is probably a good way to build things. They got a lot of smart people there. So when you look at a platform as a service offering, there's usually a basic level you get. So for free, you can get 10 apps per developer. You used to be able to have a request that took 30 seconds. They recently increased that to 10 minutes, which means you can start a program that can take 10 minutes to complete and you'll be okay. And then there's a cap. So after you send more than 1,500 emails, I start billing you by email. After you handle more than 1.3 million HTTP requests, I start billing you. So you've got a free amount to play with. As I said, when you write stuff, you sometimes get locked in. If you're writing to Salesforce's Force.com platform as a service, you're writing in a language called Apex. It is a little ironic that a company whose logo is no software has its own programming language. And by the way, they did just buy a company called Heroku that does Ruby on Rails, which is a more open language, so there's a good chance that that's going to move towards it. But when you're using a platform as a service, you're writing on their terms. You're going to them, coding their language, and so on. So you may be getting locked into the platform. And then there's the third kind of cloud, and I sometimes hesitate to call this cloud. Software as a service is simply getting your software on demand. Things like Google Apps or Salesforce or Taleo or Zoho are examples of this. The problem is, so is nearly every other website that has a login page. So while there are a lot of these guys, they kind of fit my mom's definition of the cloud, which is the cloud is the same as the web, is the same as the internet, is therefore a useless definition. However, a lot of these software as a service applications are starting to add scripting languages. Google Apps now has a scripting language for its spreadsheets. So you can write scripts that will automatically send each person custom directions in a mailing list from your spreadsheet, for example. Is that a programming language? Yes. Does that make it a platform? Sort of. So some of these software as a service things could be argued to be a cloud. But whatever you choose, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software as a service, you're dealing with a metering solution that gives you elastic use. You pay for consumption. And this is certainly why this stuff's getting so much visibility. Large government organizations are picking this up because it's very compelling to just get going quickly. So I want to say one thing in conclusion. You now know more than most people about clouds. There are private and public clouds. At the lowest level, private virtualization, public managed hosting. When you do things on top of that, you have infrastructure as a service. I have a bunch of virtual machines that I can manage. On top of that, you have platform as a service. And then if you're doing public stuff, you have software as a service. Seems pretty simple, right? You guys now understand private and public in these tiers. If someone wants to talk to you about cloud computing, insist they pick one of these first. Because most of the arguments I've seen around clouds are one person's talking about SaaS isn't secure, another person's saying infrastructure as a service is too expensive, and they're totally not agreeing with one another. But they're also not comparing. They're comparing oranges and volleyballs. They're not even talking the same language, and this is where most of the disagreement occurs. And the reason for this is this slide, probably the most important thing I'm going to show you here. Looking at this grid, if you're talking about public clouds, you probably care a lot about security fears. If you're talking about high up stuff, software as a service or platform as a service, you're probably concerned about lock-in. How do I leave if things go badly? How do I change vendors or am I stuck? If you're talking about private stuff, you're talking about long-term cost inefficiencies. Can I still afford my own machines? Is my power and my cooling too costly? And if you're talking about low-level stuff, the infrastructure, you're talking about, boy, it still takes me a lot of time to manage these machines and keep scripting them and scaling them up and tearing them down. Those are four very different concerns, and they depend entirely on what level of cloud you're talking about and whether it's public or private.